that are zooming in hear us okay?
Yes.
Yes.
Awesome. We learned that, you know, when you're doing Zoom in person, it helps to have the microphone. So if we walk away from the machine, you guys will still hear us. That's the whole point. It's not because I love my voice. I want it to be louder. Welcome, everybody. It is totally awesome to be back here. Kind of deja vu. Feels like it's February 2020. Everything's just fine. Welcome. Thanks for coming in person. Thanks for everybody joining us over Zoom. We will try to make it seamless and smooth so that everybody gets to see everything that's going on without too many hiccups. We'll keep track of you guys on the Zoom machine. So if you guys are having problems or not hearing or something, let us know, please. We're going to start with introductions just in the room. And I'm going to pass this thing around so everyone on the Zoom machine can hear us. So I'm Pedro Marquez, Executive Director of the Big Hole Watershed Committee.
I'm Tana Alf, I'm the Associate Director of the Big Hole Watershed Committee.
Hi, Don Laporte, Programs Manager of the Big Hole Watershed Committee.
I'm Jim Olsen. I'm with Fish, Wildlife, and Parks. I'm the Fish Biologist for the Big Hole.
Roy Morris, George Grant, Trout Unlimited.
Matt Norberg, Montana DNRC Hydrologist.
Chris Edgington, Montana Trout Unlimited.
McKenna Dugan, also Montana Trout Unlimited.
Dean Peterson, Rancher, Upper Big Hole.
Howard Varner, I live up on Minor Creek in the Big Hole.
Max Hansen, University of Montana grad student and summer intern with BHWC.
Jared Payne, Montana Fish, Life, and Parks, riparian ecologist.
Jim Hagenbarth, a rancher from the Bend.
Paul and Sandy Clary were residents of Lower Big Hole.
Michael Cass, I'm a reporter at the Montana Standard. Hans Humbert, rancher.
Craig Fellon, outfitter, Wise River.
Tom and Eddie Bowler from Butte.
All right. I will, just to make it easy, I'm going to tell folks who we got on Zoom. I've got Brian W., Paul Sidaway. We got Peter Frick. We got Eric Thorson. We've got P. Hooper, Sierra Harris, Leah Jones. And all right, that's it. So thanks for coming again. We're going to start with our precip report from Matt Norberg. As we usually do, this will be a really happy report. Is he going to share?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I'm going to share. So for you guys out in Zoom, I'll share my screen. And for you guys here, hopefully you'll go see it on. The rosiest boards coming up. So basically, you know, we've since kind of beginning of April, we've really been below average for stream flows. A couple of those gauges didn't even come out of ice conditions until late April, and it's just been cool and dry. And you know, a lot of the snow that we did have, mid-elevation snow, I'll get into that, but I mean, it burned off, you know, earlier than normal, and we just haven't had any precip. And that's the biggest thing. It's just been really dry, and mountain snowpack, no valley moisture, things like that. It's just not coming. And so, I mean, if you think about really, you know, how the season so far has kind of come out, you can look at it out optimistically, or you can look at it negatively. I mean, it's been cool, you know, the high elevation stuff has started to melt, but it's been holding steadier, you know, in terms of what we have up there. It hasn't all come out at once. So, and, you know, the storm that we are anticipating coming up is also hopefully going to produce some more moisture at the top and in the valleys. But if we keep that cool conditions going, you know, it kind of extends some things. You know, maybe we can hold on to that high elevation snowpack later in the year. At the same point in time, like right now, everyone's like, we need water. I mean, it's just plain and simple. I mean, it's just not coming out. The mid and low elevation stuff did what it typically does, but it did burn off, you know, a week to 2 weeks earlier. And sometimes we need that spike, you know, kind of end of April, beginning of May to kind of kickstart things. And it just came out early. And so it's, like I said, you can look at it positively, you can look at it negatively. I'm trying to be optimistic, but I think you guys all know that things are a little bit dire at the moment, just in terms of water volume. So just kind of going through this report, I talked about a lot of stuff there. But the NRCS water supply forecasts are for below average river volumes, both at Wisdom and Melrose, basically for, you know, May to July and July to September. So we're just looking at limited availability of water. I pulled this from the May 1st NRCS snow water report, and this is something they put in there that was kind of particularly generated for users in Southwest Montana. And it says water users in the Jefferson Basin should be aware that stream flows are expected to be below to well below normal for the May dry period. The current 50% exceedance forecast around 70% for average of the Big Hole, 80% average of the Boulder, 60% of average for Ruby, and 50% of average of the downstream mainstream points. And then they go to mention, you know, particular concern in this region are the forecasts for the beaverhead water users in this basin, and that should be prepared for well below normal runoff for the remainder of the season. So, you know, I mean, it kind of just goes in tune with what we're looking at right now. I mean, we've got some good moisture in late February, early May or March, but that's kind of it. I mean, that one storm kind of really set us up for, you know, at least we had that storm, I guess. Moving forward, yeah, we got some storms and it did help bump some things up. We weren't looking too bad the end of March, and then April and May have not produced moisture. So we're just, you continue that path and you just steadily decline without those additional inputs coming in. So, and I did generate this report yesterday, so these numbers are data outdated. But and so here's that's really hard to see, but stream flows just generally, you know, we're below average for this time of year, and again, that comes back to cool conditions and just, you know, things not mobilizing out of the mountains as much. So snowpack in the Big Hole Basin watershed is currently below average for this time of year. We're at 70%. And the mid to low elevation snowpack melted out in early April, approximately 1 to 2 weeks early. High elevation snowpack has kind of been holding on the best it can through April and May due to these cool conditions. Now we're starting to see those snow-tell sites, you know, starting to decline due to melt and lack of precipitation. And that's not an uncommon thing. You know, snow's got to come out at some point in time, but we are a little bit earlier, and just with a reduced amount of snow, that's a tough situation to be in. Here's just a graph. This is the Big Hole itself, the snow water equivalent in the Big Hole itself. And you can see, just like I was talking about, that late February, March storm, a series of storms kind of, I mean, that got us up over 100%, which is awesome. But, you know, maybe a couple little bumps here and there, but we just really have not got anything since that in measurable terms of precip. And then, so we came in well below our peak value for the year. and we've just started that decline. So this is the basin in general. Now I'll go through a couple of these higher elevation ones because the mid to low elevation ones I mentioned are already off. But so Dark Horse is at 75%, Saddle Mountains is 79%, and Barker Lakes is at 80%. So, at least we're at 50%, I guess, up in those high elevations. The snowtail sites have seen increased rates of snow melt the past couple of days, over the weekend and into, starting last week. Pretty, some warmer temperatures starting to move some of that snow. And that's a little bit ahead of normal for this time of year. Dark Horse, we're hoping to peak around this time of year. We're a couple days earlier, and we're already melting out. We're not melting out, but we're seeing snow melt at that site. So, therefore, we're just kind of limiting the total amount of water left to come out. This cool weather's helped form that snowpack. The upside, I guess, if we want to talk about things, is we got a big storm coming in. Hopefully, it does produce the moisture that they're forecasting. Seems like kind of some things that I was looking at. Big Hole might be a little bit on the fringe of things, but let's just be positive and let's hope that we get valley moisture, rain, snow, whatever. I know Dylan was forecasting for 3 inches, something like that, over the next couple of days or something like that. So hopefully that translates to up here, and we get some high elevation as well as low elevation valley stuff, because that's what you guys need. I mean, you need green up. You need that moisture in the soil right now, and it's just kind of difficult with how dry it's been. So again, forecast, like I said, I think everyone's been keeping an eye on weather, especially with the system. Wednesday through Sunday are supposed to be the rain and snow, cooler conditions, and then it looks like next week we're kind of a little more moderate conditions, but that doesn't look like it's going to keep right back up. So this weather pattern, if it does play out correctly, should elevate stream flows to a certain extent and hopefully provide that much needed soil moisture to the region. And we get some rain and snow events, probably not, just with the way that the temperatures are looking, but we should start mobilizing some of that snowpack, and probably this is going to kick off for the runoff moving forward. So then moving forward for the forecast, summer, early spring or late spring, summer, it's kind of the same scenario I've been mentioning through these meetings. We have transitioned out of La Nina. We are in an ENSO neutral condition right now, and that's likely to continue through the northern hemisphere throughout the summer. The 6 to 10 day outlooks are favorable for below normal temperatures and normal to low precip conditions. But as I mentioned, with this neutral phase that we're going into, these are real variable. The neutral phase is a variable condition, and we could see hot and dry the whole summer. We could see maybe some intense events. It's just really unpredictable. The neutral cycle is inconsistent with how you can predict things. But they are actually forecasting for drier and warmer conditions throughout the summer. But just want to reiterate that this neutral cycle is variable, and it's a little bit more difficult for them to predict, in terms of being real accurate. So keep our fingers crossed on that. But yeah, like I said, hot and dry. So I think we all know, we could be looking at some shortages this year, most likely. I don't know how much. Let's just hope that June and maybe the end of May here, pans out and we get some of this moisture that we, typically do see. I mean, May and June are our wettest months. June is almost 2 inches of rain. So we're going to get something. I just, got to be optimistic about things, but how much and how it comes is also really important, whether it comes in short duration, really intense events, or we get 5 soaker. I mean, it's really hard to predict these scenarios right now. So any Any nice questions?
It's not your fault, man.
I know, it's frustrating because, you know, you just want the sky to open up and give us something that's just hasn't produced.
But temperatures are staying pretty cool though at night, and that's,
Temperatures are cool right now, yeah. That's right. That our safety race,
yeah.
extend it out.
All right, thanks, Matt. If you guys didn't hear on Zoom, I told Matt that it wasn't his fault. I think that made him feel a little better. All right, Tana, do I need to share this? No,
Yes.
to the Zoom.
Yeah.
This is getting confusing here, people. You have no idea. Where am I? Oh, I got too much stuff up. Where am I? Here I am. It's working hard. Is this, oh no, I'm gonna share this. Okay. I think that's right. All right, and then slideshow dilly. This is that one. Okay. All right, so director's report, real quick, that would be me. First, I want to thank, is Southwest Telecom, is that the name of the company? Southwest Telephone Company that hooked us up with the internet here in the Grange, so we can do Zoom for folks that can't make it, which is great. I hope that is helpful for folks that can't make the drive. I know there's folks coming in from Bozeman area and all over the Big Hole, so hopefully this is a way to just have more people be able to plug in. So we'll get good at doing this virtual and in person, and offer this every month. And so thanks to them for hooking this internet connection up for us. And also Black Coffee for the awesome coffee. Those of you on Zoom, it's awesome. Okay, next thing on my list. I'm not going to touch too much on fish, wildlife, and parks. And there's been some stories in the news about kind of just general fish management and management. For a second there, we thought that the French Creek project was going to be, it kind of started and then it stopped, and it started and it stopped again. There's just some movement and shakeup in FWP as to how they are approving and going through their process for their larger fish projects. So there's a long conversation about it. I pulled up one article here that came out in the Missoulian, and it was really just talking about the way that FWP with new direction is going to be using science in how they approach their projects. From what I understand, it's less focus on big long-term projects, studies on where they're going to do work, not waiting to get results from long-term studies, and more being able to extrapolate from existing studies in other places and sort of transfer that knowledge so that the study itself doesn't hold up the work. Is that fair from FWP folks, kind of a characterization from what I understood? Okay. Our local guys here are basically saying that my guess is as good as theirs. So that's just from the newspaper article that I read. So we'll keep it at that, but there's lots going on at FWP. I'm hopeful that, you know, our partnerships with all the agencies continue and that we're just here as a resource. However things shake out, you know, the committee is ready to pick up balls that drop and run with them and keep projects going as much as we can within our capacity. Next thing I'll mention is, you know, we have this grant from the Bureau of Reclamation to update our watershed restoration plan. And so I have a map up here. This is our watershed broken up at the HUC 10 level, so Hydrologic Unit Code 10. It seems to me to be a digestible way to break up the watershed and start planning our work and our operations at this scale. So kind of, and we're going to use the Wise River as our first crack at this. There's a great partnership of folks coming together right now. to really, I know we've done this before. Folks that have been around the committee know that we've studied the Wise River, we've looked at it, we've talked about things, we've kicked the dirt around. And it's never quite led to an actionable plan, but now it seems like there's a lot of interest on us putting something down on paper and having all of our partners and landowners on board trying to move in the same direction as far as trying to keep as much cold water coming from the Wise River into the Big Hole or Smart Creek, so that the fish can move up, so that the cold water can keep coming into the Big Hole, and so that irrigators can keep irrigating. Everybody wins. And so we're gonna sort of spearhead that effort. So that's, FWP, NRCS is interested in bringing some of their targeted programs to irrigation infrastructure. The Forest Service is interested in helping us out in the headwaters, and Fish and Wildlife Service with the CCAA program, of course, is super interested. So we're going to test this out and kind of use the Wise River as a model, restoration reporting and planning at the Huck 10 level. And then once we get that dialed in, we'll start moving around to the other watersheds. This WRP process sets us up for grants from the DEQ. So Clean Water Act money flows through these WRP programs. So if you say, this is important, we want to work here, and it's in one of these documents, it's easier to get some of that 319 money, which the committee has gotten a lot of since its early days. Like we kind of depend on that program quite a bit for our work. So as you see, the Deep Creek drainage is up top in our current WRP. We put that watershed as front and center. And, since then, there's been, $3, $4, $5 million has been invested up in that watershed. And we're kind of there. We've sort of done most of what needs to be done in that watershed. So now it's time to move on. So we kind of need an update to that whole process. Part of that process, moving on, is we are talking to the Department of Environmental Quality about setting up a monitoring program so that we can ask them to go back up into French Creek and look at delisting it. It's listed for sediment. It's listed for a couple metals. We've done enough work in those watersheds that we actually have documented the amount of sediment reduction that's prescribed in the TMDLs, total maximum daily load. Doesn't exactly work that way, but we're engaging them in a process to actually, hey, relook at this watershed. We think we've hit all of the sediment issues in this watershed. Do your assessment again, and they have not been in the business of taking rivers off of lists. So we kind of want to be the first to work with them through the process of delisting streams after we put all this money and effort into the resource. It'll be a multiple year thing. And thankfully, we've got Max, our watershed health intern this summer, who will be kind of pioneering this effort with DEQ. They'll show us the sites, go here, get this information for us this many times, over the course of the year, and then do it again next year, and we'll see how it goes. But that'll be a big part of Max's work, so you'll see him up in the Mount Hagen area quite a bit. Okay, moving on. Also, part of that, Ben just worked some magic. We had this flow meter long ago donated to us by the DNRC that was busted and didn't work anymore. And Ben just worked his skills over, I don't know, like a month or so. He just hounded the company that sells these things and then found a grant and put those two together and worked out a discount, and they fixed the flow meter for us for free. And so we now have a functioning flow meter. So we can go out and start taking cross sections and figuring out actually how much water is in particular tributaries. We're not going to be hydrologists, but it's enough information where it can be useful. We're now able to go out and get stream flows. So that was awesome. It was killing me. And I said, Ben, you got to just take this. And then a month later, he's like, I did it. So kudos. Okay, there's a lot going on, guys. I'm putting together a nomination, the groundwater investigation program with the Montana Bureau of Mines and Geology. Is that right? Again, the NRCS has been getting a lot of interest from folks around the Melrose area about irrigation infrastructure. They come to us and they say, we have a lot of questions about how do we know if certain changes to infrastructure or certain improvements to irrigation infrastructure are going to actually be beneficial to the resource overall, right? And we don't know that unless we really understand the hydrology of that particular area. Like, would it be better to line this canal or not line it so that we continue to have return flows to the river? So this, I'm going to nominate that area for the Bureau of Mines to go out and do an investigation. They'll be able to just kind of tell us where important areas are for return flows, where potential storage areas might be, and they will be able to model out what changes in irrigation might do to overall water supply coming out of that region of the watershed. So we're going to throw that one out, see if it sticks. And if it does, then that'll help inform some bigger grants that we're looking at with the NRCS to help pay for any improvements that folks want to make in that area. Another big, pretty exciting announcement is that I got an email from Paul Azevedo 2 days ago, and they said, hey, because of COVID and other things, we actually have a surplus in our budget, and they are not going to charge us about $5,600 for our gauge fees this year. So that's awesome. George Grant was going to pay for those gauge fees this year. Thank you. So now we're going to have to figure out what you guys want to do with that money.
Whatever we decide to do.
Appreciate that. So we'll figure it out. I knew you maybe didn't know about this, so I'm kind of, you know.
We still have.
Yes, George Grant will still advertise that they would have been the funders of these gauges. So I guess, you know, we've been engaged with the NRC on these gauges for a while and been part of a working group with gauges. So I think we were kind of top of mind when they looked at their budgets and saw surplus, and this never happens, right? So we're thankful. Then the partnership agreement, I'm just working on bigger, longer term partnership agreements. The Forest Service to work on the Elkhorn mine, with the BLM on the Eastern Pioneers. Ben will touch on that a little bit. And then I found out today, Natural Resource Damage Program, as you guys know, they have funded our work in the Anaconda Uplands, part of Superfund. I've been working with them for 12 years now, partly as a contractor and partly through the Watershed Committee. They have signed an MOU with Fish, Wildlife, and Parks. It's official now. So management of that whole Superfund program will be led now by FWP. And that is goes through 2027, and it's $1 million guaranteed to FWP. Now, next step is we'll work with FWP to get us kind of contracted to continue the work that we're doing. That's kind of the whole deal there. So that's pretty awesome. I mean, we can start thinking and planning and doing on a longer time frame than we ever have before up there with this. So extending that partnership with FWP will just be great. And then the last two things, talking a lot, pass around our French Creek project. Received an award from the American Fisheries Society for, I don't know, I forget the specific award, but it was just for a riparian restoration award that helps native fish. And it's a beautiful plaque, so I'm passing it around for folks to see. And some of you might have seen, I was interviewed, and Chris was also interviewed just about drought conditions coming on in the Jefferson Basin. It was on Bozeman and View Public Television. And, you know, my point was, you know, it's great that the committee put together what I call the social infrastructure to deal with drought. You know, we have a drought management plan. We've got folks that call each other up and work together and sort of share in the success and share in the sacrifices that may need to be made in drought years. So that was the message that I put out there, and hopefully that represents you guys well. And that does it for me. I talked a lot. Any questions from me? Oh, God. Look at me. That was just that part. Sorry. Thank you. Our Big Hole Conservation Fund is finally now ready and has a look and has a brand. And this is, I've been talking about this for a while, but 1% for the river. This is, I will start outreaching to local businesses. And basically the idea is if they want to boost their sort of conservation credentials and identify themselves with this brand, we will promote their business through our, networks of communication, and they will ask their clients and their folks that come into their businesses to add 1% to their bill. And that money will go into a conservation fund. We've got the account all set up, and that fund will go to pay for the projects that we do. It's a pretty simple idea, and we're trying to make it flexible for folks to make it work the way they want. Businesses could sponsor specific projects, put their names behind it. All the contributions that come to us are tax deductible, so it's a write-off for the businesses. And hopefully folks will find this an attractive way to differentiate themselves, whether you're a guide or an outfitter or even a local market, mercantile or lodges. So we'll be doing some outreach with this program coming up soon. One of the big things that triggered this idea is how difficult it is to find non-federal money for projects. So you see $100,000 federal grants coming by, and they come by quite often, and we've gotten them, but you have to have one-to-one all the money that you get from the federal dollars, you got to get from non-federal sources. And that's just, our state monies are just, a 1/10 of that usually. So you got to find another way to make up that non-federal match to be able to take advantage of the abundant federal resources. So this is one way that I hope we can kind of lock in a process to do that. And if anyone wants to try, I think it might be too far away, but that little QR code there, you'll start seeing it places. You stick your phone up to it, like you're taking a picture of it, it'll send you directly to our donation page. So if we can get, one person on a boat floating by, taking a picture of this thing and throwing some money our way, we'll take it. And you can also, anytime, the number 26989, if you text Big Hole to that number, that'll also send you to our donation page. We will, yeah, they're coming. Yeah, so when you go to, businesses and we'll start working on signage and stuff like that, and you'll start seeing that QR code popping up in other places. This was just, I had to put it up here because we just got it all done. But yes, that's a good idea. And then finally, in the back corner, you'll see these maps. This is also something that I'm a map geek, and I would love to see a really nice Big Hole map. It's not just a fishing map, it's about the whole watershed. It really displays a lot of the features of the watershed that we all know and love. These are just drafts, and I really want your guys' input. So at the break, after the meeting, you want to hang out by the map real quick. And if there's places that you really love that you think should be on the map, write me a little note. There's sticky notes back there. I'm trying to decide between the landscape or the portrait layout, and also, there's a lot of decisions to be made on what goes on that map. So love your input, you guys. The more input from you all, the better that this thing will be. So points of interest, past project locations, I also kind of want to identify. And this map also summarizes about 25 years of work, where we can have some pretty impressive statistics about what this organization has done for the watershed over the years. And now I'm done, thank you. Steering committee, does anybody, we've got two, maybe we've got other steering committee folks online. I'm gonna stop sharing. Well, steering committee, any updates? No updates, they say. No news is good news. So I think the mic is making folks nervous. Okay, so we'll move on to the wildlife report. Tana, do you want to come up here? You're going to share from there?
Oh, yeah, so. All right, so we're just wrapping up. Oh, oops. Mute yourself or turn your volume off on your computer.
Three. There.
Have my what on? Oh, I don't think so, because, okay. I guess I do if anybody wants to ask a question. All right, so we're just wrapping up our 2021 carcass removal program. We remove carcasses from Big Hole Valley ranches during March through May, during spring calving and lambing, and we take them to our compost site just outside of Wisdom. So we borrow a dump truck from Red Rock Lakes National Wildlife Refuge to do that, and we have the dump truck through the end of May. So if anybody has any carcasses to be picked up, you can still get in touch with John Costa, our wildlife program tech. His phone number's there on the screen, and you can also text carcass to 26989 for more project information about this program. And we do this to remove predator attractant, to keep predators honest and reduce livestock loss to depredation. All right, this year we are also participating in the NRCS Conservation Innovation Grant project, which is being put on by Western Landowners Alliance and the Heart of the Rockies initiative. And we are one of 20 groups across 7 states participating in this program, and they are giving us funding to participate in their study and also for implementation of our carcass management program and our range rider program. And they are studying carcass removal and range riding, including effectiveness, cost effectiveness, and various other elements of those programs. So that's pretty interesting. Also, this year we have loaner toolkits for both livestock producers and just residents who are wanting to be bear safe. So we have scare devices, resource guides, bear spray, temporary electric fencing, inert bear spray for practicing, bear spray resistant backpacking containers. And we have been giving out bear resistant garbage canisters to residents free of charge while supplies last. And I would actually have to check our supply at the Wise River Ranger Station to see if we have any of those left. But if anybody needs a garbage can, reach out to me and I can set that up. Or if anybody would like to borrow or test any of this equipment, just get in touch and I can meet you, or we can figure out a way to hand that off. And then finally, the 2021 Wildlife Speaker Series is virtual this year. So we had to cancel the series last year due to COVID. And this year we're bringing it back virtually. And then hopefully in 2022, if everything keeps going the way that it has been, we should be able to have the series in person again. So this year, the series includes 3 presentations, one on pollinators in May, one on trumpeter swans in June, and then the one that the Big Hole Watershed Committee is hosting is on Arctic grayling in July. And Jarrett Payne, Ryan Kreiner, and Jim McGee, who many of you know will be presenting information on grayling virtually. So we are very excited for that one. We'd hoped to do an in-person grayling event in 2020, so it won't be quite as fun, but we're gonna make do and then hope to see everybody in person for our next Wildlife Speaker Series event in 2022.
Where's ours?
Ours, it's online in that's okay. It's on Zoom on July 22nd at 6:30 p.m.
That's right, online.
On Grayling, yep.
Where's that?
On your computer. So, all right. And that is all I have for wildlife, unless anybody has any questions, or if Jim or Dean or anybody.
Yeah.
Yes.
How do we get more information on their study of the predator carcass?
The SIG study. I can send you the contact information for the coordinator. It would be Alex Few. I can send you that information. She should be able to answer the questions. I'm still trying to wrap my head around the study and what they're trying to figure out. So.
I'd like to know how they're gonna go about it.
Oh, I will definitely loop you in.
Yeah, we're equally curious. Like, we're not quite sure.
Yeah.
They've asked us for all our range rider reports. I'm like, I don't,
Why?
yeah, why? I don't quite know.
Jim or Dean, did you have anything to add?
I don't. I haven't.
This is Jim Hageworth. We ranch in 2 states in Clark County, Idaho. A group called the Sagebrush Habitat Conservation Fund. Their biologists came to the county commissioners and tell them their story. This is a 501c3 group in the state of Idaho, run by John Marble in Western Watersheds. Their mission is to protect and restore sage-grouse habitat. Ways that they intend to do that is by buying and retiring federal grazing permits for authorized from interested willing seller committees on an individual basis who are permitted by law or regulation. Acquiring property interest from willing sellers, including property in fee title, conservation easements, or other interests. Leasing state or private land for wildlife conservation. Working with other non-profit organizations, government agencies, and others to find comprehensive land protections for native wildlife, and restoring native plants and watersheds to benefit native wildlife. This group started out with $15 million that they more or less blackmailed from the Ruby pipeline, gas line from Wyoming to Oregon. They pipeline in 15 million, then they wouldn't pipeline going through sage-grouse habitat. And so it's a well-organized group. There's 4 of them right now, 4 leaders in the group. I'm concerned because I think that the naive general public who doesn't know a lot about the ecosystem of sagebrush would contribute a lot of money to this group, and its NGOs and conservation groups acquire land, or wealthy landowners acquire land. They don't want to run livestock, but this is a perfect place where they get paid not to do it. Act on federal and state leases. John Marble in Western Watersheds, of course, if you recall, litigated the grading with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And just as a point of interest, I spent 26 weeks over 3 years helping to write the Idaho State Sage-Grouse Plan. And we showcased it in Twin Falls, Idaho. Mr. Marble was there. I went to him, and I knew him because he put up our state leases, and asked him, would you please come to the Upper Snake working group so we can understand your concerns? And he said, Jim, all you're doing is delaying the listening to sage-grouse and my ability to kick your butt off federal land. So to a rancher and to the sagebrush ecosystem, those of us who know how to manage it, this is a real threat.
Is there anything like this other than the prairie reserve is the closest?
It's the same concept,
Okay.
but Ellie's landing, I mean, they came up here, litigated against the
Okay.
Yep.
Ben is just gonna come. Thank you, Jim, for that.
I could do it too and just screen share them.
Yeah, maybe you're
Okay.
better. It's raining here. For those of you on Zoom, Matt's celebrating.
Pedro, do you want to unmute that computer?
Yeah.
And I'll remute mine.
Yeah, because folks got to hear it, and there's got to be, I think there has to be volume, maybe. Okay. Okay. Maybe stand in front so folks can see you.
All right, hi Zoom folks. Good to see you. Yeah, it's just been report. I don't think you can see.
I know, they won't recognize.
Trust me, I'm not a 12-year-old. All right, can you get this slide portion? Okay, awesome, guys. You know, I've been working on a lot of the things that Pedro's been working on, but I'll hit on all the restoration program side of things since the last time that we met. Pedro touched on the Elkhorn Mine and Mill Forest Service participating agreement. And in a nutshell, this is basically a funding mechanism to allow us to continue work up at the Elkhorn this year. And everything's pretty much ready to go as far as the agreement and contracting, but now we're basically in the black hole of the Forest Services contracting hole. So we're kind of waiting on that one. Hopefully we can hear back from them soon so we can start work up at Elkhorn. However, probably couldn't get to it yet anyway, but I'm crossing my fingers that that's actually going to come through sooner than later. And basically the bulk of the work that is going to consist of, that we're going to do basically this year, is a soils characterization around the mill. And basically what that will do will give us an idea of how much and where the contaminated soils are at the Elkhorn, and map those soils out, give us some strong data on what the contaminants are looking like up there, and then hopefully start on a preliminary design to start to pull out the remaining soils that are contaminated up there. So we have a participating agreement, and I have a BOR grant in the works right now that we're waiting to hear back for on Elkhorn as well. So hopefully by the next time we meet, I'll have an update on that. Eastern Pioneers, again, we're in the middle of a participating agreement with the BLM. And this is another funding mechanism to really kickstart work in the Eastern Pioneers, riparian conifer encroachment, low tech riparian enhancement work. So no shortage of work up in the Eastern Pioneer foothills. And yeah, hopefully that will allow us to really get going on project work next year. Again, this month we met with agency folks in the Wise. Liz Jones gave us a big tour up there, and it was my first time kind of kicking the dirt around with folks on what's going on up there at the Wise. But we're ready to kind of dive back into that drainage and look at how we can improve stream flows coming out of the Wise. As we all know, it's a very big, it's the biggest tributary to the Big Hole and a very important cold water input. So how can we keep that water flowing into the Big Hole longer in the year, more of it, right? So irrigation infrastructure and efficiency is one of the ways that we can do it. So yeah, this year we're going to start to get some more data collected on it. And hopefully Max is going to help out with that effort as well. And I'm happy that there's a lot of smart people who are working on this thing, because it's going to take a lot of minds to kind of figure out what's going on in that whole drainage to kind of hit on our resource goals. Forgot I should be standing right here. Awesome. Then I also started some Upper Oregon Creek pre-project monitoring. And this is a project that I got some funding for with the DEQ. Again, going back to that Hawk 10 watershed and our watershed restoration plans. This is part of that Deep Creek drainage. And yeah, you can see Pedro and I were out one day and installed a couple gauges, and we were out there this afternoon actually doing some more pre-monitoring. But The goal of that monitoring effort is to show the impacts of our project on stream flows and vegetation change. So yeah, kind of got Max oriented into that whole area and into some of our project sites up there. And yeah, a lot more to do up there and a lot more to come on that Upper Oregon Creek project. On the Anaconda Upland side of things, really a lot of what I was doing this month actually was reporting out on all the work that we've done since 2018. And you know, don't need to go into the weeds on that, but just imagine a lot of paperwork and GIS work. We've done a lot of work up there since 2018, and right now we're just compiling all of it and kind of giving a big picture of what it looks like. And this is an effort that is important to do in my mind because of the agreement that we're entering into with the Fish, Wildlife, and Parks. So it's a worthy cause, and it's been taking up a lot of my time, but it's for good reason. So
Really for EPA
Yep.
and NRD to kind of have closure, an official document.
Yep, exactly. Certified completion report, right?
Construction completion.
Yep. And then looking into next month, I have crews coming out again, and the first 2 weeks of June, I know for sure we're going to have project crews, labor crews out there, dipping into the toolbox and doing what we do up there. So sediment control, goalie fill plugs, just the whole nine of what we're doing, and that's going to be closing out that NRD contract with this last spring push up there. All right, and I also have been fundraising our Upper French Gulch Fish Passage project. I testified this year during the legislation, and I'm still waiting to hear back on some DNRC grant funds for this project. And we're still a bit short on the fundraising to actually do the project. So I've been working on some grants and writing a grant for that one, and still keeping the ball rolling on Upper French Gulch. So I know I haven't touched on it in a while, but it's going to happen, knock on wood, sooner than later.
And you don't know where we're at with the RDG?
No.
We're ranked.
Yeah, we were ranked
Where?
14th.
14.
Yep.
So it's
Yep. And I testified, and there was no questions from the committee, so I felt good about that. And of course, they didn't give me a timeline on when I would hear from them again. So, boy, I think I applied for that grant like a year and a half ago.
I thought the legislature had to approve those, like it should be done.
They do, yeah, so the legislature approved it as part of DNRC's budget. It's like one item of the whole card sort of budget proposal. But then DNRC has to go through, and they start with the top project and contracting, kicking the money out the door, then they go down the list. So by the time they get to the 14th project, it may be 11.
Okay. And this slide just shows that I took Max out on a couple project tours. We looked at a beaver dam analog project that we did on the West Fork of California, and man, it's just looking great. I've said this before, but like spring is my favorite time of year just to see these restoration projects because they're in their full glory. And we just had a great day. I also volunteered with Jarrett and FWP and a lot of volunteers who were out at the Lower French Creek project that they did in 19, was it? Or no, that was 2020. And so we were cutting willows and planting willows, and it was good camaraderie to be out with like-minded folks and be a part of that project. So I was happy to be a part of it because I'm going to have another volunteer project similar to that, where I'm going to try to get a bunch of folks out. So I'm here volunteering, I better participate, right? Cool, guys. That's all I have for my update. Any questions?
All right. That was a lot to get through. All right, next thing real quick is we got to get to this approval of the drought management plan. You want to take that?
Okay, so the Big Hole River Drought Subcommittee met last fall, and they've suggested that the full committee adopt the current version of the drought plan, which was written in 2016, or last updated in 2016, I should say, written originally in 1997. But so the recommendation is that the full committee accept the drought plan with no changes for 2021. And I think we need a quorum. I'm not sure if we have a quorum.
We've got 10 between both.
Perfect. So does anybody have any discussion or questions or comments? Do we need to do an actual vote, or can we just?
I think if there's no, we'll assume agreement unless there's any dissent. So we're assuming we have consensus unless anybody chimes in. No pressure.
The current version of the drought management plan is there, 2021 then, and we will review it again this fall to see if we need to make any changes for next year.
Thanks, you guys. Thanks online. Okay.
Got it. Okay. That's it. And then last thing, new topics, unless anyone has any other ones, we do have one new topic to bring up.
Yeah, the steering committee does have a report.
And the steering committee does have a report, and the report is we are so proud of the team that you have working for us. And, we get the biggest bang for the buck. It kind of reminds me of the Keneally brothers. They invented copper wire and Butte by fighting over a penny. And these folks have done a wonderful job. And we should be very proud of.
Me and Tana been in like a mud pit somewhere. Maybe lose my water. Thanks, yeah. This is just the coolest job, the coolest people to work with. So wouldn't want to do anything else. Matt has one additional thing to bring up.
So this is Matt from Rican DNRC. Pedro brought up that bill that we did submit to the Big Old Watershed Committee. And so I just want to touch a little bit more on that. So back in 2008, DNRC got a grant to put in 4 real-time stream gauges, primarily focusing on the upper Big Hole. So number 1 would be at Saginaw Bridge or Skinner Meadows Road, so it's kind of headwaters. And then as we move down, the next one would be on Minor Lakes Road, and then the next one down past that is just below the Lake Creek Road. And then if you go all the way down, just above Wise River, it's Dickey Bridge. And these gauges have been populating data, and they're really working for the CCA management reach areas. So the upper end, reach A, reach B, and then reach D. The USGS, they fully operate gauges at the Wisdom Bridge and then at Mud Creek Bridge. These 4 gauges that we've been working on, we call them furnished record sites. So it's actually, DNRC has been operating the gauges, doing all the discharge measurements, working up all the data, and we didn't have the capacity to have that data published online, and that's where the USGS came in. So again, we worked up the data. It was satellite telemeter. USGS had grabbed data, and they worked with us to put in what we call shifts or corrections to the data, things like that. And then that data would be posted on the USGS website. So moving forward, what we're going to be doing is, and this is the funding thing, is we're going to be taking those gauges, same exact sites, same exact data, and we are going to be just moving the place where you access that data from the USGS website to the DNRC new, what's called Stage, Streaming Gauge Explorer. Same data. I do all the data. I'll be working up all the data, the same thing. It's just going to be a different place to view the data. So I think we'll have Pedro's got it up online right now. It's an example site. We'll have historic data that's been populated at those sites, and then we'll have real-time data moving forward. So every hour you'll see a new set of values come in, and it's like I said, it's the same thing. It's just going to be a different place to look for it. So Just want to let you guys know that, moving forward, that'll be July 1st, starting July 1st.
That will be published more on. Yes.
That's correct. I'm not quite sure if USGS, I'm betting, I don't know for sure, but I'm betting that once they stop data collection on July 1st, I believe that they're gonna have historic data still on their website, because they keep this in their system. But I'll confirm that for the next week.
What's one of the ones, Matt, just so I can pull it up?
Well, we don't have them on our site right now.
Oh, okay.
But if you go to USGS, go to Dickey Bridge, Bingle River to Wise River, it's 0602 4580.
On the USGS site, right, but that's the one that would be
It will be coming into this.
system. Okay, I won't pull it up now but yeah, it's pretty awesome.
And it's an app. You guys have an app developed yet?
Well, not a specific app, it's just mobile friendly.
So I'm wondering how this will affect our river conditions webpage that updates automatically for USGS. Will we just need to,
We have web services, we'll be able to tie in with that. And we're working with Matt Heller on.
oh, perfect.
This all just came to light.
Oh, okay. Well, if Matt Heller's already on board, then we should be set. Cool.
All right, so let's take a break. And then we'll be back for Jim's fisheries update, which is why a lot of us are here. But there is some leftover cold pizza, great coffee, cookies. Help yourselves. Be back in about 10 minutes. All right.
It's a lot to get there.
Yeah.
We're busy. Better busy.
So what's going on, man? If you're getting on the Really nice. You like to do that? We don't have that many.
I can just unplug it for a few minutes until we're plugging it.
Last thing you want to do.
I just need to
So you,
unplug this and plug it into the charger for a minute.
so what, you take this splitter or something, say your house.
Because, yeah. Oh, the charger's. That's what I was wondering if there was one somewhere around the Grange, but like I just need a chair, I think.
Okay.
And we'll just leave it plugged in for a few minutes until we restart. You know, just bring me paint. I knew I'd forget something today. That'll work. Well, we could probably unplug it in a few minutes. Or we can. Yeah. Nope.
Price, right?
Where are we? Oh, are we just powering up? Is that what's going on? I'm gonna put you back up here. I think I was just losing battery. You know, if you want, I can advance it, and that way you can just talk. All right, folks, let's get back to it. Yeah, let's do it, and then if it gives you a low battery warning, I will replug it in. Or we can just end it, or just keep going until it dies. And let me make sure I share this guy. So far, it seems like the landscape version of the map is winning. Am I right? I hope so, 'cause that's my favorite personally. Okay, all right, Jim Olsen with our fisheries update.
All right, cool. So I'm gonna run through these slides hopefully pretty quick, but if you have questions on stuff, you know, I just ask them whenever. We don't have to wait till the end or whatever, unless you know, Pedro and Tana want to do that, or however we want to do this. But I'm going to try to be pretty brief and just focus on what's going on in the river right now, and then just give you a little update on where we're at with French Creek. And that's all I'm going to talk about today. So. As far as our fisheries monitoring goes on the Big Hole, we do 4 main sections that we monitor for primarily for brown and rainbow trout. Those 4 sections are the Jerry Creek section, that's the upstreammost section that we sampled. Then downstream from that is Melrose. And then we do one between Glen and the Notch that we call the Hogback section, and then we have one in the lower river between Pennington Bridge and High Road Bridge. So those are the 4 sections that we routinely monitor to keep track of trout populations in the Big Hole. Historically, the Grayling crew has handled sampling above that point in the CCA reach. And since we've gone to genetic monitoring of the grayling population up there, we don't do any significant river monitoring up there of trout populations. Our focus has been on the lower section. So I'm going to just jump into some numbers. We'll move like from upstream to downstream. So this first graph is for Jerry Creek. All these graphs are going to be the same format. And so these bars represent, the blue bar is the number of fish per mile. The red bar right behind it is the pounds of fish per mile. So what those two bars together represent, so if the blue bar is greater than the red bar, it means there's a lot more little fish in the river. So we generally have a really good year class of age 2 fish. And when the blue bar or the red bar is bigger than the other one, there's just more bigger fish in the river. When the two bars are equal, the average size fish is about 14.5 inches in 1 pound. So if the bars are the same, that's your average fish. If the red bar is bigger, your average fish is going to be bigger than that. The blue bar is bigger, it's going to be smaller. We don't have a whole lot of long-term data for brown trout in the Jerry Creek section, mostly because, as you can see from the early 80s, there were not very many brown trout in this section. The dam that used to be present in the canyon, just above Silver Bridge, used to prevent brown trout from going upstream. And so the river was primarily a rainbow trout fishery, was exclusively a rainbow trout fishery above that dam until it finally, I don't want to say, I know it was partly taken out and by floods and things like that, and I think eventually was completely removed, or mostly completely removed. I ripped a big hole in my boat this last spring on it. So anyway, but like historically, this has been primarily a rainbow trout section, and it hasn't been until the early 2000s where we saw brown trout numbers significantly increase in this section, and so we began to monitor it more readily for brown trout the last 8 to 10 years. So we shock this section every other year. And you can see from this, and this will be a trend through all of these slides, except for one section, is this downward trend in the last 5 years or so. And so we see a significant decline in our brown trout numbers in this section and in almost all the other sections that I'll talk about today. And I'll talk a little bit more about this when I get to Melrose, when I have a more consistent data set to go off of. You can't see that here, but this is the same slide except for rainbow trout in this section. So if you see on this one, that this blue bar is always significantly, or has been historically, a whole lot bigger than the red bar, which means that this was has been historically a really high production area for juvenile fish. So we have a lot of little rainbow trout in this section. Historically, we're not seeing that more recently. We're not seeing any significant declines in rainbow trout numbers in the last few years, other than that we're seeing a lot fewer juvenile fish present in the river, which may be an indication that spawning habitat might be changing up in this part of the river, where we're not getting that kind of recruitment that we used to. All right. All right, Pedro, it's not working. I can't advance it.
Great.
You broke it.
Now I'm the tech guy.
Yeah.
What? What? Is that sharing?
Is that sharing on your channel? Okay.
Huh,
Yeah, I don't know why.
that's weird.
Perfect, thank you.
I don't know what I just did.
Okay. All right, so this is the same graph except for a different section. So this is the Melrose section. we put in at Melrose and go to Browns Bridge. And this is the data set that we have the most long-term information from. So the earliest population estimates that were done on the Big Hole occurred in this section. So dating back to 1969 was the first one that we still have record of. And so, but starting from the early 80s or late 70s, excuse me, we have a consistent data set all the way up to the present day. So let me walk through a few things to understand about what's going on in this data set. So special regulations went into effect on the Big Hole in 1981. So right about here is when the river was divided up into two sections at Melrose itself, with a slot limit above Melrose and artificials only. And you can still fish with artificials downstream of Melrose. And so that happened in the early, like I said, 81. And what we see after that point is a steady population incline. So fish numbers increased through the next 6 or 8 years. And then we kind of went from an average of, 400, 500 fish per mile up to more like an average of about 1,000 to 1,100 fish per mile. Here were, this was a really dry time. Multiple years in a row of drought in the early to mid 2000s. And then after that, from about 2008 through 2014 or so was a little bit above average precipitation, good water years, and you see the trout population rebounding, actually hitting like all-time highs in 2014. Again, this is just for brown trout. In the fall, so these estimates are all done in the springtime, in March. In the fall of 2014 is when we had the fungus outbreak on the river, and we saw pretty significant fish kills. And that was reflected, of course, in the 2015 estimate, which was half of the year before that estimate. But then the next year, a significant rebound. Both the fish moving into that section, and then also you see a big, but the blue bar in 2016 is much greater than the red bar, which indicates that there's a really good year class of little fish that year. So take away the big mouths, have a good water year, and also the little guys survive really good. So that's what we saw immediately following that.
Okay. I'll operate from over here. We keep going. Yeah, thank you.
Anyway, so, but after that, we have not seen a significant fish kill at, so 2014 and 2015 years back to back saw significant fish kills on the Big Hole. Since that time, there's been very limited mortality we've been able to document in the fall of post-spawn fish. Haven't seen the fungus in those fish since then. However, our population numbers are still going down. The last few years, like this spring, I said, well, it's going to go up this spring. We had a good water year last year. Plenty of water through August. September was a little bit dry, but plenty of water through August. We're going to see an uptick, and we didn't. So this spring on the Big Hole at Melrose is the lowest population estimate we've ever done, ever since we've been taking numbers on the river. So right about 400 browns a mile. So anyway, not great news there. Let's go ahead and click to the next one. This is a graph of just those H2 fish. So these are brown trout that are 8 to 11 inches long. As we manage the river, it's really important. These are one of our main statistics that we look at, is what's coming up. What do we have coming up? And you can see that following those fish kills in 2014 and 2015, we had really good, strong years of juvenile fish coming up. So while total numbers of the fish were on the decline, there was a lot of fish coming. So we knew they were coming. It was just a matter of them growing up. But the last few years, with the exception of 2019, with an average year, we've been well below average. And this statistic in particular correlates really well with flow. So when we have really good water years, 2 years later, a year or two later, that's when we see really good recruitment. We see a lot of those little fish survive. So when we have the water up into the, filling the whole river channel, we have flooded vegetation on the sides, willow bushes and things that are falling into the river. That's what creates the habitat that keeps the little fish alive. When the river gets really low, those habitats dry out and the little fish got to live with the big fish and they get eaten. But it's kind of concerning, just the last few years not having any significant good recruitment. So we don't have, right now, the main, you know, the fish that are there in the river are 14 to 18 inches long. And there's not very many little fish coming up behind. Go ahead. This is the kind of interesting thing is, although we have a lot of, our brown trout numbers are way low, typically when we see that sort of thing, you can see that in this graph that right after 2014, when our brown trout took a dive, our rainbow trout numbers started going up. So the rainbows are starting to fill in that, or we assume they would kind of fill in that open niche that's left by the low numbers of brown trout. And so we saw initial kind of increase, but then we're just kind of flat. So the rainbow numbers are not really increasing to fill in the open space that's available in the river. So moving downstream to our lowest one, I forgot, and I should have mentioned this when I gave this presentation to George Grant, that I forgot that I didn't present last year. So I could have thrown in the numbers from the hogback section, but they look very similar to Melrose on that same sort of decline. The only place we haven't seen this significant decline is down in the lowest part of the river, down here at Pennington, which is also our lowest density of fish, but it's not that far behind Melrose now, as far as our numbers of fish go. That number in 2019 is probably a little inflated because of some runoff issues we had while we were collecting that particular population estimate. But the numbers overall, there isn't really a negative trend with the data in the lower part of the river. And I'll talk a little bit about this in a second too. So go ahead and go to the next one. This is for rainbow trout in the lower river too. Same sort of thing, no negative trend, but what you do see, which we lacked anywhere else in the river, is that blue bar is twice the size of the red one. So in the lower river, there were tons of little tiny rainbows in there. Their numbers looked really, really good in that area. And like I said, we didn't see that in any other area for rainbow trout, and nothing significant for brown trout either. Other than there were a lot more juvenile brown trout in this section too than the upper sections. So, the one thing you get with few fish is big fish. So I can guess what's, you guys are there, TV can't guess, but how big do you think that fish is? How long is that fish? We have a measure, we have a D-liar on the board, so we know exactly. All right, yeah, Craig, how big is that fish?
Craig's gotta know.
That fish is 32 inches long, just over 10 pounds, right behind Dewey, in that Cherry Creek section. So go ahead to the next one. It's just a little short video to kind of get a better idea of how big it is when lets it go.
Jeez, this is a monster.
I had a conversation this afternoon with Mark Thompson, and we had the same problem when you catch a big fish and you've got a little net. It's really hard. Anyway, yeah, you can just go ahead and see. Yeah, you don't need the commentary.
Fisheries banter, come on.
Yeah.
Fishery guys
Oh, we just
banter.
talked about, you know, you're sitting there fishing, because once he kind of laid in the rocks, you couldn't see it if you're just sitting there and you see this head that's like this big come up and you can fly. That's scary. Go We'd have to kill it to find out. I have no idea. Yeah, at least 10 years old probably. Our typical fish, like at 18 inches, is a 6-year-old. Yeah. So, but he may have got big somewhere else too. So, you know, they may, you know, he might have gone into, you know, up higher in the river where there's fewer brown trout and got real big and move around downstream. Yeah, it's hard to say. The one thing we saw too this year, which we've never documented before, is a grayling down by Twin Bridges. So this is that Pennington section. That's the tobacco roots in the background there. So we caught 8 grayling there. We caught 9 grayling at Melrose. And I think we caught 4 or 5 at Jerry Creek. So anyway, we just saw more grayling in lower sections of the river than we've ever seen before. 9 ish. I don't remember the exact number. We always get them at Jerry Creek. That's why it doesn't stand out to me. So. The other piece of data I wanted to talk about is what's going on with fishing pressure on the river. So every 2 years on the river, we do a statewide fishing pressure estimate. So some of you, this year is the year we do that estimate. That's in odd years. So some of you might get a thing in the mail from Fish, Wildlife, and Parks that asks you where you fished this month. That is where this information comes from. So as you fill out that little survey and mail it back, we're able to generate these fishing pressure estimates for all the waters in Montana. These estimates are pretty accurate for rivers or for bodies of water that get quite a bit of pressure. They're not very accurate for those that get very little pressure. So if one person fishes a mountain lake, it shows up as like 400 people fishing it during the year. So it doesn't really work. But for the big hole, it's pretty accurate. So these 3 lines, the top blue line represents the total pressure. The lower 2 lines are residents and non-residents. And so you can see the big hole averages, you know, pretty equal pressure between residents and non-residents. You know, it's a beloved river, of course. And like I said, it gets about equal use between locals and people that come in from out of state. The one thing is so I started in this job in 2008, and there were like 38,000 or 48,000 angler days, and now we're almost 90,000 angler days. So in 13 years, almost double the amount of pressure is occurring on the river during that time span. So that is one thing that is just been generally increasing. Don't see any indication that that's going to change. It's been really cool to have numbers from last year when nobody had anything else to do except for go on the river and float. So there was a ton of people on the river last year.
We did document like one of the stream gauges got like 21,000 hits between June and July. Just the website, like people looking at that particular gauge. So if that gives you a sense of, you know,
yeah,
that number sort of would fit somewhere in this.
Yeah, I mean, I know for like, you know, outfitters and things like that, business, there's almost none. So this is mostly people from Montana that were going out and fishing, or coming in from out of state, other states, hopefully to get away from COVID and fishing here. So yeah. That's correct, yeah. Odd years, yeah. So it's this year. I already did mine for February. It's just random. They send it out to random people, whoever has a fishing license. So, you know, it's pretty concerning what we're seeing for brown trout trends on the river. You know, brown trout are our most hardy fish. They're our bread and butter as far as what we manage for in this lower part of the river. We manage the river for a brown trout fisher. And so seeing the trends that we're seeing, particularly since they buck everything else that we've known so far as like what's driving this fish population, is kind of concerning. And so we're trying to figure out A, what's going on, and then B, what to do about it. So like I said, what we do know is like in the last couple of years, we've had consistently poor recruitment of juvenile fish. So our numbers of litter fish are down. Angling pressure continues to rise. We haven't had any significant signs of disease. We haven't noted any fish kills in the last few years, except for last year, actually, up in Dean's Country, up in the upper Big Hole. Those fish spawn quite a bit earlier because it's generally cooler in the upper valley. And we saw quite a few dead fish at Minor Lake Road, or not Minor Lake, Twin Lakes Road up there. Actually, ironically, when we were taking down the fishing closure signs, there were dead fish floating down the river. But that was kind of, we think that was linked to, it was really warm. That first week or so in October was really warm, and then it decided to be winter shortly thereafter. And then by the time our fish down here is spawning, the middle of October, it was cold. And so we didn't have those really warm temperatures that really stress those fish out when it's warm. We took disease samples from all those fish up in that upper river, and nothing came back as being wrong with them. But they had fungus and they were clearly dying. So we're pretty confident that that fungus stuff has to do with warm water in the fall. The one thing to note too about what we're seeing, and I think, you know, I haven't seen the newspaper article yet, but it talks about, you know, and we're seeing these sort of this isn't a Big Hole unique situation that's unique to the Big Hole. Many rivers across Southwest Montana are experiencing the exact same sort of trends, where brown trout numbers are really starting to dive. So it's not, the reason I say that is it's what we're seeing is probably not a Big Hole problem. It's probably something bigger than that. So the other things we do know is with this is that spring's coming earlier, fall's coming a little bit later. And that might be one of the things in particular that might be affecting the brown trout as it relates to their spawning and the kind of mortality that might be occurring post-spawn. Go ahead. But it's still unclear as to why we don't have, there's no smoking gun. At least for anything that we can really put our finger on and say, this is why brown trout numbers are declining. So we don't have a good, and it's kind of frustrating because if we really understood it, then we could potentially do something about it. But we don't have a really good idea right now what's causing this decline. You know, we don't have any really good current information on harvest. All of the past studies that have been done on the Big Hole suggest the harvest is really minimal. At least 90% catch and release. Don't know if that trend is increasing now or not. If more people are keeping fish, I don't see it, but we don't have any data to back that up or substantiate any sort of harvest information that's coming up. We did through our tagging study that we did 6 or 8 years ago, we were able to determine at least the 90%, I think it was 93% catch and release rate of all those tagged fish that came back. 93% of them were people who let those fish go. And that's probably biased a little bit high because everybody who kept a fish saw the tag. Not everybody who let a fish go saw the tag because they would get green and you can't see them very well, but I'm sure as you bit into the tag or filleted it, you always saw it. So, the other thing too is with increasing angling on the river, there's always some mortality associated with catch and release. There's always going to be, and so as angling pressure increases, the impacts also to the fish are going to increase. There's just no way around it. And one of the things that we don't know about too is if there's some sort of disease that we just currently don't know anything about that might be there, that we don't know how to test for. Coronavirus is always the thing that comes to my mind, that just didn't exist a few years ago, and now it's there. And if there's the potential for a disease or something like that that's present, that we just don't know, that we don't know how to detect yet. Is it? Next one? Yeah. So what are we going to do about it? You know, we're looking at fishing regulation changes. And we don't really have any data to suggest that fishing is driving what we're seeing in the decline of fishing or the decline in brown trout. But these are the tools that are in our tool bag to reduce any sort of impacts to the fishery. And so we're going to be looking at likely going to be proposing fishing regulation changes, certainly for the big hole, and they may be more broad based on what other biologists are seeing in numbers around the state. We also might be looking at seasonal closures. Like I said, our recruitment has been really poor the last few years. So closing the river to fishing during the time in which brown trout are spawning and their eggs are incubating. So brown trout spawns in October, its eggs are in the gravel till April, when the juvenile fish hatch out. So, you know, potentially closing the river to protect those fish and their eggs while they're in the reds. The one thing about the angling closures, though, is that, like I said, we're not entirely sure. We have no data to suggest that angling is driving this, what we're seeing in the declines. And if that is the case, then restricting angling may not produce the results that we want either. They may not produce, you know, a rapid increase in what we're seeing for fish numbers. We also have a statewide study that's coming out hopefully in June that's looked at historic data across most of our significant brown trout fisheries in the state, and looking at the potential drivers for what's causing, looking at angler use, looking at temperature, seasonal temperatures, also like drought related things, flow, and seeing how those correlate to what we're seeing for brown trout trends. I think the one key message to take home from this, besides we don't know exactly what's causing this, is these are the types of things that are going to happen when we sign on for wild fish management. So in the late 70s, or in the 70s, when we decided to stop stocking the rivers and rely on wild production of fish to sustain these fisheries, we kind of inherently said when these things happen that, you know, stocking fish isn't going to be our solution. So when numbers go down, we're not going to stock fish, we're going to work on habitat. And so if the habitat is good, these fish are incredibly resilient. And if we take good care of the habitat, if we understand particularly if there are habitat issues that might be going on that we can work on, the fish will show us that they're incredibly resilient. And we've seen that in the past where we've had declines in fish numbers, like during drought times or whatever. When those conditions changed, fishery improved. We've seen it with whirling disease. When whirling disease came in, our rainbow trout numbers just tanked, and now they've rebounded. They're up near exactly where they were before whirling disease came. So if we're focused on habitat and maintaining the habitat and potentially even improving habitat, that's our best bet for producing resiliency in these fish populations. So the things that we're going to be focused on in particular are spawning and rearing. We have a potential project at Melrose we might be able to do there on a slough channel of the river where we might be able to increase the spawning habitat. Like Ben was talking about in the Wise River in Pedro, you know, the potential to increase connectivity of these tributary streams. So having these tributaries which deliver cold water connect all the way to the river, while still hopefully, well, not hopefully, you have to, fulfilling the needs of agriculture. Like, well, Liz gave a great example of this. So she used to divert water from Jerry Creek to irrigate the pastures that are just upstream of Dewey. And now she's able to convert those, she's been able to convert those water rights so that she doesn't divert any water from Jerry Creek. All that water goes straight to the big hole, and she has a pump down next to those fields, and she's able to pump directly out of the river and use warmer river water and allow that cold water to make it all the way to the river. So that's exactly kind of what we're looking at on Wise River. If there are opportunities there to trade water, if you will, I don't know if that's not the right word. Water rights are really the tricky point in that, with that stuff. So it can happen. It has happened. And if the fish biologist was king of the world, you know, that would be an easy process to do. Because I think you can meet the agricultural needs, but just by swapping warm water from the river with that cold water that's coming out of the mountains. So, oh, sorry.
Are you monitoring for the saprolegium fungus that caused the fish kill in 2014?
Yeah, so every year, so the question was if we monitor for the saprolegium fungus. So there's no way, well, I guess there is a way. We don't like monitor the water itself for the fungus. It's ubiquitous. It's going to be there all the time. But we do, we call it our dead fish float. We do a dead fish float every fall towards the end of spawning season, where we float from Melrose to Browns Bridge and just count the number of dead fish. 0 last year was the count. I think it was 1 the year before. And so it's just, that's what's not occurring right now. We're not seeing any significant die-off of fish as related to saprolegium. Yeah.
Heard numbers, we know a number of what people are handling fish, like the picture and all that stuff, what percentage of fish succumb to that?
Yeah, so the question is what percentage of fish die as it relates to catch and release fishing? So I've seen anywhere from like 1% to 5%. A lot of that can depend on when that fish is caught, like the water temperature and the time of year that fish is caught at, as to what their mortality rates are. But it's something in that neighborhood generally.
So fishing numbers.
Yeah, catching, yeah, exactly. So if fishing pressure has increased 3 times in the last 10 years or 15 years, then catch and release mortality has probably increased at that same rate. Yeah, and I think that would be a fair assumption. All right, so I wanted to talk a little bit about the habitat part of this and then bring in, you know, what's going on in the lower river as it might relate to habitat and potentially building resiliency into these fish populations. And so I've talked about this project with the committee before, and the committee was a partner on this spawning related habitat. This is Smith Slough, which is located between Pennington Bridge and High Road Bridge. And this was a spawning habitat related project. The slough system itself is about 1.5 miles long. Go ahead and go to the next one. This was a project that we did with the landowner funded primary most of this project. We call it the system splits between 2 separate channels. We call one the ditch channel because that's what primarily was used as a ditch. They both follow old channels of the river that went through the area. And so the ditch channel is a little more isolated, floodplain wise from the slough channel. So when the river gets high and tops over its banks, the slough channel has 300 CFS of water going down it, but the ditch channel is a little more isolated, so we can regulate the flows in there a little bit better. Are we able to go? We went the wrong way. Oh, perfect. There we go.
Sorry.
So we did a bunch of spawning enhancements, or that was my part in the project. TU funded a lot of this project as well, was to improve the spawning habitat by primarily importing spawning size gravels into this system. the natural substrate there is just a little bit too large for the fish to make their nests in it. So we imported, we did about 1,200 feet of actual spawning habitat in the channel. And every year, or the last 2 years, we've been doing red counts in there. So in the fall, counting brown trout reds. And, we're just seeing an increasing trend, but these are all fish that have just moved in on their own. We incubated rainbow eggs in here for 2 years as well. But all the brown trout are just fish that are colonized and going up and using that area by themselves. So a significant number of fish are moving in there, and we expect that trend to continue. There's still a lot of habitat there available that can be used. So the idea is the fish come into the sluice system, spawn, they rear for a year, and then they go out to the river and get big. And go ahead, go next one. These are just pictures of what the reds look like if you haven't seen one. The female lays on her side and fans the gravel really hard, basically digs out a pit in that gravel. She deposits the eggs at the same time the male releases sperm. Their fertilization happens instantly. The eggs basically fall through a little cloud of sperm, and that's it, they're fertilized. Then she moves upstream, fans the gravel again, piles up a little bit of gravel on top of those eggs, and just kind of continues that process, moving upstream, laying eggs several times. Except for brown trout, those eggs lay in the gravel all winter long. They're very sensitive to disturbance, particularly for the first half of their incubation. So stepping on them, disturbing them, flipping the eggs over can cause mortality of the eggs. Yeah, so we excavated out the substrate that's too coarse and just put gravel back in its place in specific areas. So runs that had the right depth and velocity, and most of the pool tail outs have this gravel added to them. They look like that. So if you go to the previous slide too, Pedro.
Is this, am I on it?
Yep, that's it.
Yeah.
So basically all the rocks are covered with moss except for where the red is. And so they clean it all out. That's what the female is doing. She lays on her side and fans the gravel. She's pushing out all the fines, all the sand, and all of the algae that are associated with those rocks. They all get cleaned out. So it makes all these open spots in the holes between the rocks, and that's where the eggs settle into, and that's where they sit. Yep. Yeah.
They're really noticeable.
For like the brown trout, they'd probably be visible to almost at ice is over in the main river. But in the springtime, you cannot see them. You'll see the depression will still be there, the little dip, but everything else looks the same, like the algae. So in the springtime, you can't tell they're there.
Did we just do?
Yeah, no, you can go to that previous one.
Okay.
The reason I brought that up is this was a habitat related project in the lower river that we did. And we haven't seen the significant declines in brown trout in this section. And in fact, like I said, this is the only section where we've seen pretty decent recruitment of both brown trout and especially of rainbow trout in this section. And so it's clear that whatever is affecting the brown trout in this section is going to be affecting those fish down there too. I mean, everything's trickling downhill if it's disease or whatever it may be. The other funny thing I said at the meeting was, so what brown trout really need in a big hole is less and warmer water. If we have that, then they seem to be pretty resilient. So, so everything we're doing, that's not true. So, but I think it's related to habitat. And so as we're doing these habitat projects, certainly what's going on there, what's going on here is affecting fish down there too. But there's resiliency built into this, where we're seeing still good recruitment coming out because we're building a sorts of habitat there that those fish need to keep things going. Like I said, for rainbow trout, this is the only place we saw significant numbers of juvenile rainbow trout in the whole section. All right, I was going to switch gears, so we want to talk any more about the river stuff?
Yeah. I have a comment.
Paul, we'll get you in 1 second. We got a question from here.
Okay.
What condition were they in? Were they skinny? Were they
Yeah, they look good. Yeah, I didn't run the condition factor numbers, but the fish look good.
Can you repeat the question?
Oh, sorry. So we were talking about, you know, what kind of condition the fish were, if they're skinny or fat, and the fish were in good shape, really good shape. They looked really good. Yeah. All sections looked that way. They all looked really nice, healthy fish.
Trying to figure out what's causing all this. As you know, I've observed a decline in the hatches on big hole. 10 years ago, the salmon flies really started falling off, and within the last 5 years, almost all of the aquatic insect life has declined alarmingly. I mean, it's been said that the health of a river is dependent on the insect hatches. And it's a good way to judge the health of the river. And our hatches are just disappearing. It's almost obvious that if they don't have anything to eat, they're going to die. So,
yeah, I mean, yeah. So Craig's asking, like, what's going on with bugs? Like, it seems like there's a decline in bugs, in the numbers of hatches and the bugs that you're seeing. And you know, we don't monitor bugs, but I can tell you the fish aren't starving to death. The fish look really, really good. The fish that are there are fat and healthy, nice looking fish. I mean, there's always a few skinny fish. That's always there. But compared to, you know, where we were when we were 1,900 browns per mile, every brown trout was skinny. These fish are fat. They're healthy, nice looking fish. The fish aren't starving.
Jim, would it make sense to think of a average run or pull on the river, and the trout that are a little more aggressive are pushing these other trout out, and with very few insects, the ones that are aggressive are going to put on weight and look normal, but the ones that are being pushed aside to less advantageous spots are not getting anything.
Yeah, so you'd expect to see that at high density, like, but at low density where we're at now, I think there's plenty of habitat available for them. Like, there's no competition over the best feeding lies there, because you know, and if we had rainbow trout responding, that may be the case, but you know, there's a lot of habitat compared to where we were, you know, 5 years ago with fish numbers, that there's plenty of places for a fish to go to eat. So I don't think like that part of what's going on there is limiting those fish. Hans, did you have a question?
Oh, I had Paul up next.
Oh, sorry.
Here, let me get Paul. Paul, go ahead. Let me try to put you up here.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, decent.
Yeah, great. Hi to everyone. Jim, thanks so much for getting the data. As I mentioned before, many of us that have had the opportunity to have fished on the river for many years have clearly noted that there was a brown trout decline, but we have to have that data, you know, to really verify it. And I wanted to call out Michael Cass for really an outstanding article in the Standard today discussing the problem and also potential solutions. So a couple of statements. Clearly there's been a catastrophic decline in the brown trout populations on the Big Hole. We know that for sure. And I'm going to talk about the things that we do know, because there's not much we can do about the things we don't know right now. So we know there's been a catastrophic decline. We know that the angling pressure with the data just through 2019 has gone sky high without any doubt. And I suspect that in 2020 with COVID, we probably went over that 100,000 number. So yes, the catch and release issue percentages, which actually I've seen different numbers. I've seen anywhere from 5 to 20% of fish that potentially die. So obviously more people fishing, even if 90% are practicing catch and release, more fish are going to die for sure. The other thing that happened in 2016, and this relates to the whole issue of wild fish management, which I'm glad you mentioned, Jim. This is the long-term plan that we want to have wild fish management on these rivers. In 2016, we went to year-round fishing without giving the fish a break on many of the rivers in Southwest Montana. Some still have closures, Beaverhead, and a couple other places have closures. But we went to year-round fishing, and at that time, the head of Fish, Wildlife, and Park said, we will monitor this, and if there's changes to the population that are significant, we can potentially go back to help protect these fish. So I strongly believe if we're going to have wild fish management and not end up stocking our rivers again, that we got to look at giving these fish a break at different times of the year, or I think we're in big trouble. So I think a lot of focus needs to go on the things that we do know about and the changes that can take place. And we can't wait, I don't believe, to do some of these things. And I'm hoping that you can come back soon and tell us what kind of progress is being made and what kind of decisions are being made to help the fishery. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. Yeah, and I can talk to that a little bit, just that, you know, as far as any changes in the regulations go, any potential changes I think would come before the commission in July and potentially could be adopted by August, kind of an emergency sort of situation. So we have a next week, all the Region 3 biologists are getting together to compare notes as far as what our spring data shows, and kind of formulate our own plan or our suggestions that we would take to Helena as far as this stuff goes. And as far as what Paul said about, you know, fishing year round, like the big holes it's been open to fishing year round since the 80s. The tributaries all opened in 2016, but it's catch and release only. Technically a whitefish season on the big hole during the winter, but nobody fishes for whitefish anymore. So most people are out there catching trout, but it's catch and release the whole river wide for during the winter season. Hans, do you have a question?
Daughters, are all way more than these days. How are you addressing?
So the question is, pelicans, otters, predators are way more than they used to be. And that is true, but not in the last 5 years, unless it's something significant that we don't know about. You know what I mean? I mean, the pelicans have been around. They're always there. I mean, they're up there as soon as the ice is off the river. Almost, it seems like, you know, up in your country, but these declines are just in a limited scope as far as like when they happen, and especially down here lower in the river. I mean, I don't know if you guys have seen many pelicans. You guys are out on the water all the time. The way I see them is up at your, you know, from like, you know, East Bank upstream, you know, eating the grayling probably, but that's where I see them. And, you know, I know we have all, you know, a few otters and things like that too, but you know, the other thing is, and I did mention this, and I should have, is we're not seeing any decline in whitefish. Like whitefish are still by far the most abundant fish in the river. They're probably 2 to 1 to trout. And so unless these otters are getting finicky and you know, selectively picking on the trout yet, I don't think that's what's going, you know, that there's so many whitefish there to eat throughout the whole system. And we're not seeing any sort of decline in them. They look fantastic this spring. We didn't do estimates on them. We've done them in the past. We didn't do an estimate on this year, but all age classes, all little ones, all the way up to big ones, there were lots of whitefish in the river.
Got one on the Zoom. Ryan?
Yeah, thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, you got you're mic'd.
All right, thank you. So my question kind of revolves around the disease issue that was discussed earlier. And, you know, considering that you're not seeing any mortality in the fall with brown spawning, it would seem to be either an egg mortality issue or some sort of juvenile fish mortality issue that's potentially disease related. And I was just curious, like, does the methodology even exist within FWP to try to ferret out whether, you know, there is some disease that's, you know, either attacking the eggs or attacking these juvenile fish? Thank you.
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm not a fish pathologist, so I don't know for sure what the answer is to that question. As far as whether there's something that a way to, if mortality is occurring at the age or at the egg stage or the juvenile fish stage where they're small enough where you wouldn't see them. That's a great question. I don't know the answer to that. There are, of course, specific diseases that are that way. Whirling disease is a great example of that, where it doesn't affect the egg, but it affects the juvenile fish, most certainly in an age where you actually see mortality. We see the fish that survive and you have deformities on them, but the fish that die definitely happen and they're less than 2 inches long when they die. That's a good question.
All right, thank you.
Thanks, Ryan.
So, in the previous conversation, you mentioned that you had good success with the data transfer. You got a lot of
Oh, from the big holy meat? Yes, yep. Yeah, yeah. So the question is if the grayling are suffering the same issue that's going on with brown trout, and the answer is no. Grayling numbers look pretty good. Right, whitefish and grayling, yeah. Right, yeah. I don't know if I'd say that rainbows are declining, but certainly, obviously, brown trout are. So, yep. Yeah, brookies are a little bit tough in the main river, mostly because they're pretty much absent. We pick one up every now and again. We didn't catch a single one this spring in any of our sections down lower. You have to get up in the upper valley where you start running into brook trout and particularly in the main river from Wisdom down or from Jackson downstream, the brown trout have pretty much replaced the brook trout. It's mostly a brown trout fishery now. Yeah, same thing with cutthroat. There's very few of them. We caught fewer cutthroat than we did graylings in the river. So there's just not very many. So.
If there's nothing else online, I minimized everything.
And I don't need to go into this very much unless you guys really want me to. It's getting pretty late, and I can just give you like the Cliff Notes version of what's going on with French Creek. We did our first round of treatment of French Creek. The barrier was done in 2019. Or maybe I'll show you some photos because I didn't present last year. So just go through the first couple of photos. Okay. This is what the fish barrier looks like on French Creek. It's right at the bottom of the WMA. This is anyway, and this is what it looks like when there's a whole lot of water going over it. Paul Olsen took this photo last spring. Figure it's about 300, between 300 and 400 CFS that's going over the fish barrier there. Almost exactly this time last year. This is what happens when you get rain. Hopefully this is what it looks like next week, right? Go ahead and go to the next one. Anyway, the spillway, just to give you an idea, the capacity of that spillway, so this is 300 CFS, the capacity of the spillway is almost 1,000 CFS. So this is a lot of water coming over that for that size of stream. The capacity of the spillway can handle more than 3 times that much before it would fill up all the way. Anyway, we treated the stream. The way we did it was we treated all the tributaries first. We put up temporary dams, canvas dams for all you irrigators, fish biologists use them too, to make a little bit of a waterfall that the fish couldn't get back up as we treated all the tributary streams first, and then we just came down the main stem and treated the rest of it. And go ahead and go to the next couple. You can just fly through these real quick. I'm not going to talk about. I just wanted to show you what the neutralization. Oh, I guess I should mention we were very cognizant of how open this area is for public access. So we were very, we signed everything. Wherever we were treating, we closed the road. If it was going under the highway, everything was signed.
And in Spanish too.
Yes, yeah, just that's part of the legal requirement. It's got to be in Spanish too. That's because the guy who came up with it lived in California. So go ahead and go to the next one. Just you can fly right through these papers. These are little canvas dams we put up to just make a little waterfall that the fish couldn't get up. So at the bottom of the project area, we neutralized the rotenone using potassium permanganate. So we put potassium permanganate in the water. That neutralizes or breaks that rotenone molecule apart, so it's non-toxic to fish. So go ahead and this is kind of what that setup looks like. There's a bladder on top of the dam there, and it runs down, and we're able to meter the amount of permanganate that goes into the water and actually measure it with a meter itself. We can physically measure it, and then we also monitor it with fish in a tank. There's a tank down there, you can't quite see it there, but so fish tell us when we turn it on and when we can turn it off. We cannot turn it off until a fish can survive for 4 hours in the water. And so in this case, we started detoxifying on Thursday, about 8 hours before any rotenone at all made it down to this point. And we detoxified through Saturday morning, and then it was done. So you can go ahead and fly through. This is what it looks like when it's in the water, purple Kool-Aid. It turns the water purple. It lasts. So if you know where the fish barrier is, this picture here, and this is a little video, I won't play it because it's long and boring, but this is right at the WMA boundary. So we have a bucket of fish in the water at this point. That tells us whether our neutralization is successful, and also measuring the amount of permanganate that's in the water still at this point. And so we apply the permanganate so that at this point, which is 30 minutes downstream, the amount of time it takes, the distance the water flows, it tells us if we maintain that that permanganate concentration between 0.5 part per million and 1 part per million, that's adequate to neutralize the rotenone completely. And then it doesn't hurt the fish either. If we go above 1 part per million, it'll start to actually hurt the fish. And so that's how we regulate that. Everything went just as planned on that whole project. Nothing out of the ordinary took place. The plan is to retreat that stream this year, treat it for a second time, and then in the summer of 22, we'll eDNA the water, so we can actually take the water, filter it, suck 10 liters of water through a filter. If there's any DNA of fish that sticks to that filter, we can send that into a lab, and they'll process that and tell us what fish are there, or if fish are there. So that's how we're going to test once we're done, if there are any fish left. It's a great technique because it can tell us, we have to do it every 250 meters as we go up the stream and all the tributaries, but it can tell you if there's one fish there. If we shock fish, it's really, really hard to find one fish that's this big. But with this technique, you can tell. So anyway, that's the plan. If that tells us that there are no fish, we'll be ready to restock in 2022. If there are fish still present and we need to retreat, hopefully it'll just be a small section of the stream if we have to do that, and we'd be able to begin restocking either that same year or in 2023. So that's kind of where we're going with that. Any questions on French Creek or any other sort of native fish stuff? No, we can let them sit there. Yep. They rot in place and
they sink.
They do, yeah.
That was a surprise to me.
Yeah, they
I don't know
almost,
why.
Yep.
I don't know why I didn't know that.
yeah. And you, within, when it was warm in the summertime, 10 days, they were gone. They're completely gone, so. All right, any questions there? What's that? Yeah. No, well, either, yeah, mostly decomposing, yeah. After a couple of days, not much wants to eat one of those. Even a bear wouldn't, we never.
Ben picked one up. It smelled pretty good. Awesome.
Oh yeah, that just put that fish came from McVeigh Creek for some of you guys that live up that way, that one of the streams that restored about 10 years ago. So, yeah.
Cool. Thank you, Jim.
Yep. All right.
Guys, it's late. Thank you for hanging out with us this long. Thanks for coming. It's great to see everybody again in person and in Zoom. I think we're gonna make this work from here going forward. And our next meeting, we will be presenting on aquatic invasive species. FWP will be presenting on their efforts to keep mussels and other invaders out of our waters. And that date is, it's always the third Wednesday, 16th of June. We'll be right back here. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for coming. Check out the map in the back. Give us your comments and drive safe. Thanks.
Yeah.